everyone, this is Direwolf20 and welcome to part 2 of my mod spotlight covering the Create mod. Today's spotlight episode will focus on windmills, rotational energy and bearings and all these other things that allow you to make some really cool stuff. And then we're also going to take a look at some of the machines and blocks that are used to progress through the mod. Things like the blaze burner, the basin, the mixer, the press, and fans. So let's get right into it because we have a lot to cover and not a whole lot of time. So last, as part 1 of the spotlight, we covered water wheels, which is a pretty basic way of generating rotational energy. We get about 256 stress units per water wheel. It's not a whole lot though. So once you start progressing through the mod, you really want to get a windmill up and running because that's one of the best ways to generate rotational power beyond water wheels. There's other ways as well that we'll branch out to into the future, but the windmill is, number 1, a really fun thing to build, and number 2, a really good way to get lots of rotational speed and energy with large amounts of stress units. So let's do it. So a windmill, you're going to want this thing to be pretty tall. So you're going to want to start by building up some shafts. And a cool thing about shafts is you can keep clicking on the bottom shaft with the arrow pointing in the upward direction, and you'll see that it's kind of like, the structural block things. You can kind of just keep placing them and they'll keep going up. How cool is that? Nice. And to get the windmill placed, the next thing you're going to want is a windmill bearing. And windmill bearings are special forms of bearings that are designed to be windmills. There's another kind of bearing that we'll talk about in a bit that will be used to rotate structures, but we'll talk about that after we do windmills. I think the first thing I want to show you is windmills and the basics of it, and then we'll get into mechanical bearings. So with bearings, and this goes both for the mechanical bearing and the windmill bearing that we're looking at right now, the side that's green is the sticky side. That's the side that's going to stick to and move objects. Now, there's several ways we can hook up this windmill bearing to get things going. First off, you can put any block in front of it. And when you right-click the windmill bearing, it's going to allow it to turn. However, there's really nothing for it to turn just yet, so nothing's going to happen. And that's normal. There's several blocks you can use to get this thing spinning, though. Sail frames are the more advanced versions of them. They're dedicated and designed for use with a windmill. You can also just use regular old wool, though, if you want. So the most basic way to do this without sail frames is to use wool. So one approach, in order to get 2 blocks to stick to each other, is to use super glue. This stuff is pretty straightforward to make, and you simply right-click on the side of a block and then put another block on it, and that will glue the 2 blocks together so that when they're being rotated by a rotational bearing, in this case a windmill bearing, they can turn together. So now when we right-click this guy, we'll see he's starting to blow in the wind. So the wind is generating rotational energy for us, and the windmill is turning. Pretty cool. Now if we were just to place another piece of wool block here, it's only going to turn these 2 because they're the ones that we stuck together. Right? If we want this guy to turn as well, we're going to need to put a place of super glue there, and then you're good to go. Nice. Not too shabby. So one option is to do that, right? Continue placing glue and super glue and just get it going. And this works for many different kinds of blocks. So for example, if you wanted to use like a fence block, because these will look pretty cool, what we're going to do is something like this. Right? And you'll only see the glue blocks when you're holding the glue in your hand. So you'll only see the rendering of the glue when you're holding it like that. So how cool is that? Oh, pretty neat, right? Now, I think without any wool blocks at all on here, clicking on this won't actually do anything. But let's get some wool onto this dude, and we'll get it running. Sound cool? There we go. And this will turn. Nice. Not too shabby. And a good windmill would probably, have multiple blades. And you can kind of set them up however you want. Now, if you don't want to have to use glue everywhere, another option would be to use these guys, the linear chassis or the radial chassis. Now, I'm going to focus on the radial chassis with the windmill, but I'll talk about the linear one in a minute. What the radial chassis does is it can directionally control any sides that have this wooden checkerboard kind of pattern to it can have blocks stuck to it. You're going to need one piece of glue at least. So without any glue here, you'll notice nothing's happening, right? So when I right click, nothing's happening. But if I put one piece of glue here and then connect several pieces of wool, when I right click this, all of them are going to turn. So the radial chassis allows an outward direction from these wooden sides to all be moved at once. And you can control how far this is moved by holding a wrench and looking at the radial chassis. So you can see the radius is 8, and there's even a little bit of a render going on the wool blocks, and that render will disappear in a few seconds or when you get rid of the wrench in your hand. So what you can do is you can kind of scroll this down. So say I only wanted to have a radius of 4, ta-da! And now when I right click on the generator, only those 4 blocks will move. But if we keep it at a radius of 8, for example, it'll go beyond, right? We've got 6 blocks there, so 6 is all we really need. Doesn't super matter. We'll go ahead and click it, and it'll start moving all of them. So that's another way to do it without doing too much wool. But remember, it only moves the side that's sticky, so keep that in mind, right? So let's put some wool blocks here. And we're going to click it. Oh, right, only the side that's sticky, right? So you can go ahead and use some super glue there, place your wool block, and now we're rotating, and that's pretty cool, right? So if we really wanted to make, a decent windmill, we could do this and expand this guy out a little bit more, and suddenly he's working. Not too bad. Not bad at all. And that's 1024 stress units, so we've bumped up our stress units a little bit more. Long story short, the more wool you put on here, the better. Pretty cool, right? So that's your radial chassis. That's one way to take an approach. Another way to do this might be to get yourself some sails. So you can get the sail frame, which does work on the windmill, but it's not as good as the white sail, which you can, by the way, dye, as it indicates there. When right-clicked with dye, changes the color of the sail. So some wool in the center and some sail frames, and you'll get what you need to get a white sail. And quick addendum here, white sails and sail frames are both the same efficiency. So it's totally a decorative decision if you want to use white sails, sail frames, or wool. They will all produce the same amount of rotational force, so it really doesn't matter, technically speaking, which ones you use. It's just decorative. White sails really don't need any glue at all, and they're dedicated to being used with the windmill. You'll also notice they have that nice little directional thing on them. So it's another kind of block that can be used for windmill power. So without any stickiness at all, we just right-click the generator and he'll start spinning, right, and producing his stress units. And we can bump out this thing actually pretty good. So I'm going to do about 8, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in each direction. That sound like a plan? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 beyond the initial one I placed. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 beyond the initial one I placed. And now when I right-click this generator here, he's going to start spinning in the wind, producing 2048 stress units. So already way more stress units than we were capable of from the water wheel. Trust me when I say windmills are where you're going to get your early game power for Create. And you can really decorate these windmills however you want. The rotational energy and the stress units are generated from sails, and from only sails, by the way, and wool. But you can place any blocks you want on them, and you can decorate them however you want. Now, Dyer, he ain't that good at decorating, so I'm just going to show you the basic mechanics here. But yeah, you get the gist. So I'm just going to really bump this dude's amount of sails up, and I will show you that you can get actually a really, really large amount of rotational energy going on if you give it enough. So we are now generating 5,632 stress units, quite a bit. We can go even larger though. So I just bumped it out another bit on either side, 6656, 7168, and 8192. That is the max. So what I have here is, starting in the center, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 by 3, right? On each side here, and that gets you to your max, 8192. That is a lot of stress units. So that'll really get you going quite well. Now the generator is outputting to the back here. So really what we need to do is stick a vertical gearbox on this, right? And then run our shafts down like so. So go ahead and stick your shafts on the bottom of that, and that'll run it down. And as you can see, you can just click the shafts all the way down. Pretty awesome. So that'll be a good way to get you some early game, large amounts of rotational energy. You're going to need a decent amount of wool and a decent amount of wood, but that's usually not too big of a problem. Now, the windmill is not the only thing that can be rotated. There's a lot more complexity to what's possible in Create. And this is going to play a major role as we get further into the spotlight to look at how to automate and build large machines that can do things for you. But I want to introduce you to the basics of mechanical rotation of blocks, which, like I said, will be used in the future. You can imagine, if you will, combining this with things like the mechanical drill and the saw, and several other things that are going to play a role once we check out how to combine a lot of the components of Create together to build large machines that'll do things for you, right? But the main focus right now is you should understand the basics and mechanics of rotation. So how do we rotate blocks in Create? Well, similar to the windmill, we can use the mechanical bearing, this guy, to rotate larger structures with rotational force. When powered by kinetics, it starts rotating. We're going to want to use things like the radial chassis and the linear chassis to help with the rotation of things, and I'm going to show you some of the rules of that now. So let's start with the mechanical bearing. Boom. So that guy's sitting there, and we can right-click him to activate him. So if we put a piece of stone right on top of him, because there's already a sticky face there, when we right-click this thing, it's allowed to turn. Pretty cool. But if we put another piece of stone on top, no, that's not going to work, right? But just like with the windmill, if we threw some super glue on there, it would. Aha, now we're starting to see some cool stuff. And if we wanted to have, you know, a few more things happening, we could use some more super glue and make it so. Neat. It should be noted, by the way, that slime blocks are naturally sticky, so they will automatically be sticky to each other without needing to use super glue. Now, kind of like we saw with the radial chassis, the linear chassis has the side on one side of it, well, two sides really, the front and back, are the sides that can be sticky. So I'm going to attach it to the sticky side on the bottom there. I'm going to throw some glue on top because remember, in order for a chassis to move a line of blocks, you need them to have the one piece of glue on the top there. We can now throw things like the stone down, and when we activate this guy without any glue in between them, they'll all turn. And just like with the radial chassis, we can use the wrench to rotate and adjust the number of blocks that are allowed to be moved. So if I set it to 4, it'll look something like that. Pretty cool. And now when I start rotating this guy, only the 4 will be rotated. And if we want to bump that back up to 8, it'll cover all of them. Nice. Now, just like before, if you want to attach some glue to the side, you can do so, and it'll continue moving those blocks. But there's a better way. If you, instead of using glue, want to use more linear chassis, you can. Just don't forget to glue the one side. And then you can adjust the sizing, like we did before with the wrench, and specify it to move. Pretty cool. And you can go a little bit crazy with this. So you can combine them however you want, and you'll see that you can move all kinds of cool stuff. All right, now I'm impressed. Furthermore, linear chassis can link up with one another, assuming that they're facing the same direction. So if I do something like this and make all the sides sticky, check this out. Nice. You can adjust individuals, or if you hold Control on the keyboard, you can adjust them all. So hold Control to adjust all of them that are linked together. Release Control to adjust just one. The next thing I want to show you guys is the radial chassis. So we focused on the linear chassis here. It should also be noted that if you want two chassis to go together but not be linked up, you can use the secondary chassis. And what that'll do is it'll be its own individual chassis that's separate from the others. So see how these are not connecting? Just note that that exists for some of your, intrepid organizations. But let's take a look at the radial chassis. Remember, that has sides on all 4 sides of it rather than just the top and bottom. That can be made sticky. And just like everything else, it can be rotated here, assuming that you give it enough length on your linear chassis. So now we can put things on all sides. So let's put a piece of glue here, and you'll notice that it can now turn that side. But what's cool about the radial chassis is you can rotate an entire area by doing something like this. Now, because all these blocks are connected to one that is glued, we don't need to glue all 4 sides, but if they weren't connected, we would have to glue all 4 sides. But check this out. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And just like with the linear chassis, you can adjust the range by mouse wheeling here. So we can bring the range down just a little bit and make it a little bit smaller or a little bit larger. You'll see it's a radial chassis, so it does something like that. I'll bump out the size a little bit more here just so you can see the actual sizing. So here we go. We can bring it down to this, that, or that. Pretty cool. And it goes up to, I think, 16, so you can get a pretty decent size spinning. Anybody want a revolving door for their base? Ah, that's cool. Note that these rotational blocks will push players and other entities. Also note that when you link radial chassis like these together, you can adjust them by holding control as well to change all their radiuses at the same time. Now, if you want this to respond to a redstone signal, use a clutch. That's the way to make that happen. So just go ahead and throw your mechanical bearing on top of a clutch, and then I'm only going to put 1 piece of stuff up there, but get it spinning, and then you can use a lever on your clutch to stop and restart the rotational energy. So now that we've seen the basics of rotation, let's switch gears and take a look at some of the machines that you're going to need to use and some of the mechanics that are used to advance through the mod. How to get some of the different items that you might need to progress in this mod. So there's a handful that we need to look at, and a couple other machines that we're probably going to see. I'd like to show you the crushing wheel, I'd like to show you the mechanical mixer, the mechanical press we saw a little bit of already, but we're going to check it out with the basin and the blaze burners as well. So let's take a look at the mechanical mixer, because this is an important one. It will mix items together, and if you look at the usages of this thing, there's quite a few things it can be used for. Number one, it can be used for automated brewing, which is pretty neat. But you also need to have it heated. Another thing it can do is automated shapeless crafting, which is kind of cool. So if you have any shapeless recipe, whether it's from vanilla or a mod, you can go ahead and use it to automate the shapeless crafting of things. And you can also use it to mix certain materials. So for example, we can use it to make brass by mixing copper and zinc, 2 of the resources that are available. And you'll note that on the bottom here, sometimes you need a heated blaze burner, but sometimes you don't. So for example, if you want to make an andesite alloy, you do not need a heated blaze burner. Let's give this a shot. So we're going to make some andesite and iron nuggets together to make andesite alloys. Sound good? So andesite and iron nuggets. Now, in order to go ahead and use the mechanical mixer, you'll notice that there's actually a cog wheel inside the mechanical mixer. So that's how we start turning this thing. So what you want to do is get yourself some kind of rotational energy going from any of the things that we've seen thus far. And I'm going to use a vertical gearbox here to get this oriented the right way. So if I put the vertical gearbox here, and I'm going to go ahead and put a small cog wheel here, those cogs can now interact with the mechanical mixer's cogs, and you'll see that it's turning. It appears that this mechanical mixer is not rotating with enough speed. Uh-oh. As you'll note, there's a moderate speed requirement for this thing to run properly. It needs to be at 30 RPMs. And if we put a little speed measurement on there, we'll see we're only rotating at 16 RPMs. Not good, so we definitely need to ramp this up. Luckily, we learned last segment how to do this. So now if we go ahead and throw a mixer here, we should see that it's going to work for us. All right, no more warning. I guess it's good. So now that we've got a properly spinning mechanical mixer, just go ahead and place a basin directly underneath the little spinny bit and drop some items in there. So I'm going to drop my andesite and my iron nuggets in like so. Ta-da! And the mixer will do its thing. And when it's done, it's going to retract, and we'll see that inside is the result of our craft, the andesite alloy. Very simple and straightforward to use. Do note, however, that you can add recipe filters here. So sometimes you'll find that there's multiple resources needed to make different things. We might want to filter out and specify the type of thing that we want to make, so it won't make something else, even though it's valid, assuming that we add the filter there. So if we just go ahead and drop the item on there, or we can use the regular filter items like we saw last Spotlight episode. Now, one of the first things that you're going to want to do once you've got a mixer going on is you're going to need to make some brass, because brass is what gets you into the second tier of creates machines, right? We saw some of the advanced tunnels and funnels that you can make with brass. There's a lot of things that you need brass for beyond the basics of create. So in order to make that, we're going to need some zinc and copper ingots, but we also need to heat the machine. So you can see it requires heating by way of a blaze burner. Some things require superheating, and in order to do that, you're going to need a blaze burner fed with blaze cakes. So just when you see in JEI here, if it needs superheating, you'll note that it needs a blaze cake to really get that blaze burner nice and hot. How do we get a blaze burner? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Step one is to create yourself an empty blaze burner. And then all you need to do is pop into the nether and go find a nether fortress. Right-click the blaze burner, as it indicates on there. When used on a blaze or blaze spawner, captures a blaze in the item. So find a blaze spawner or a blaze and right-click it on that blaze or blaze spawner, and it'll capture the blaze and use him for crafting. Pretty cool. So if we give ourselves a blaze burner, like so, which you would normally get by just right-clicking on a blaze or a blaze spawner, and place it underneath, you'll see he's a little bit sad looking. Look, he's not very... Poor blaze. He does not look very hot. And if we try to craft with him, we'll learn quickly that, no, not so much. Let's give it a try just to validate that this isn't going to work. So if I were to get a copper ingot and a zinc ingot and try to combine them, no such luck. Dun, dun, dun. Because while we have a blaze under there, right, copper and zinc should be making brass. While we have a blaze under there, he's really kind of cold. He's chilled out. So we need to feed him some kind of fuel. I think any fuel will work on this, but I'm going to go ahead and feed him coal by right-clicking on it, and boom. He gets heated up. And now that we've fed him coal, you can see that the mixer started mixing, and it's happily doing its work. Nice. That's pretty cool. So, like most furnace-style mechanics, this thing will eventually cool down. So you're going to have to feed him coal occasionally to keep him hot enough to do the processing for you. As a note, your basin is not only used for mixing, your basin can also be used with the press to do some compacting. So just note that there's multiple uses of this basin. Besides mixing, there's also compacting that can be done with it as well. Now, another important component of your factory might be the encased fan, which can be used for quite a lot. It doesn't have much of a stress impact and not much stress capacity when it's used as a generator, but it is very useful for crafting. You can do things with redstone to do different things with items. We're going to cover a lot of what it can do. There's a ton of things the fan can do. It's used for a lot. So let's just get right into it. So one thing a fan can do is it can be used as a very, very small amount of generation for rotational energy. You need to make sure that the fan is facing down, which means that the little thingy here is facing up. And then what we're going to do is drop a lever on it to make sure it starts spinning. And that's all there is to it. It'll generate 64 stress units, so really not much. It has to be above some kind of heat source, though. So lava or fire or something like that. And it'll generate a really small amount of rotational energy. The other thing it can do is either push or pull entities. So players, for example, can be pushed, or items. Pretty cool. And the rotational speed affects how fast it's being pushed. So what I've just done is sped up the rotation here, and now you'll notice that first off, it's running the opposite direction, but it's going to move items a lot faster. So the direction with which the fan is being turned determines whether it's push or pull. So if you want to reverse this, just throw a gearbox right here, and now it's blowing and pushing instead of pulling. Hooray! Another neat trick with fans is that you can place them directly above chutes, which remember we saw last episode. So if you place a fan pulling items up through a chute, you can go ahead and then drop items underneath that chute, or if items are running on belts underneath the chute, it'll pull the items off the belts as well, and then the items will get sucked into the chute here, and then you can use this guy, a brass funnel, to pull items out. Pretty neat trick. So if you want to use chutes to get things pulled up rather than dropped down, you can do so using fans. Also, if you'd like to see the items hanging out in the chute, just right-click it with a wrench, and now you have a little clear viewport to see what items are currently chilling in there. Pretty cool. Let's drop a whole stack here. Nice. That's cool. It should be noted that, as you would expect, placing a full block in front of the fan will prevent airflow. However, pushing a half slab block there will not prevent airflow. Very important for what I'm about to show you. The encased fan, if there's a specific block in front of it, can be used to do some forms of crafting. For example, with a lava block in front of it, you can see it does some form of smelting, which is pretty cool. Most smelting recipes are available here, as shown. So, for example, let's say we wanted to turn sand into glass. So all we need to do is place a bucket of lava in front of the fan, and you'll notice new particle effects being shown here. Now this still does blow items, so keep that in mind. Also, if you're not in creative mode, it might hurt a little bit. So make sure to set up a nice protective area to drop your items, and they should get smelted. The black smoke effects indicate that smelting is occurring, and this thing will shortly turn into a glass block. Neat. It is called bulk smelting, by the way, so if you want to make sure that you're doing it right, do something like that, and you'll get a whole stack smelted kind of all at once. Pretty cool. It might take a little bit longer to do the entire stack, but it'll do it. And you'll notice that our sand has turned into glass, pretty quickly too. The speed of the fan only affects how fast items are pushed when in front of it. It will not affect how rapidly they get smelted. However, you can face multiple fans in front of lava blocks into the same block space, and that will increase the speed it gets smelted at. So if you want this to smelt faster, put 2 or 3 or 4 fans with lava blocks in front of them, all hitting the same block space. In addition to that, you can have a fire burning in front of the fan, and it'll do smoking, like turning kelp into dried kelp and turning raw salmon into cooked salmon. So, you know, some cool smoking effects. So I think this is pretty much any recipe that would work in the smoker. Does that sound about right? Looks about right to me. And finally, you can go ahead and throw some water on there, and what that'll do is the fan will do some washing. So, for example, it'll turn concrete powder into cyan powder and other things. Also notice that this will give you crushed iron ore, which we're going to see in a moment how to make, will turn into iron nuggets. That's going to be an important part of your ore processing setup. So just note this ore washing setup. Hey, it turns sand into clay ball. 25% chance though. I mean, that's pretty well balanced, right? I think so. We got to try that one. Yeah, sand into clay. Not too shabby. It should be noted, by the way, that this operation can occur on belts. So if you're a little bit creative, you could turn and make a pretty simple sand into clay automation system. Not too shabby. This applies for smelting and smoking as well, by the way. So the next thing I want to tell you guys about is the crushing wheel. So this has a high stress impact. This thing causes a lot of stress on your network. So make sure you have a pretty good amount of stress impact going on when you're starting to use it, especially if you want it to move quickly. Because again, like most machines here, the faster the thing is spinning, the faster it's going to operate. So speed equals speed. It's pretty straightforward. What this crushing wheel does is it's your ore doubling mechanic, sometimes a little bit more than doubling. So you'll note that, for example, with iron ore, you will get crushed iron ore when you drop iron ore on top of these wheels, and they need to be spinning into each other like shown in JEI here. So make sure your rotation is correct. You're guaranteed to get 1 crushed iron ore, and you've got about a 30% chance to get 2 more, and you have about a 12% chance to get a piece of cobblestone out of it. So let's give this thing a shot, shall we? What I'm going to do is place one of these dudes here with a gearbox, and then one of these dudes here with another gearbox, and then I'm going to place this dude here and here, and some crushing wheels. And you'll notice they're spinning into each other. Very important because of the way I place the gearboxes. So we need to have these gearboxes aligned correctly. If they're rotating the wrong way because of the wrong gearbox, that's bad, right? So make sure you've got the right rotational motion going on. They have to be carving into each other. And then if you get yourself a little bit of iron ore, and drop it on top there, you'll see it get crushed and then spit out the iron underneath. Now, we got lucky and happened to get 3 crushed iron ore. So with a 30% chance here, you're going to occasionally get extra iron ore. So it's not exactly double. However, you may recall that I mentioned that you can go ahead and wash your iron ore. And when we do so you can either smelt it directly, for 1 crushed ore becomes an iron ingot, or you could wash it. And when you do so, you're guaranteed to get 10 iron nuggets, which you intrepid Minecraft experts may know is 1 nugget more than needed for an iron ingot. But there's also a 50% chance to get 5 more. So if you add up all the chances here, you're probably going to get double and sometimes triple your ore output from running your iron ore through a crusher and then through a washer, right? So that's pretty neat. Just make sure that if you did happen to add a gearbox here somewhere along the way, you add another one to make sure things are running the right direction. So what you probably want to do is drop your crushed iron ore in here and get it cleaning. So you might need to, of course, add iron nuggets to your filter here to make sure things go through smoothly, but that shouldn't be too hard. You probably at this point know how to get things moving with this kind of stuff. So make sure to add your nuggets to the filter, and now when we put the crushed iron ore inside the chest, we'll notice that it's going to sit there and it's going to wash before it's allowed inside to the chest here. Pretty slick, right? Not too shabby. And we're getting iron nuggets aplenty. And you can absolutely use chutes and any of the other mechanics that we've seen so far to cause items to drop off belts. So it's your job as the player to build a belt system that can cause the ore to drop from here. When the items drop through the crusher, they can land on belts that then feed into the chest here, and then that thing will spit out the ores and get them washed. And then you can use the iron nuggets. Now, if you want to combine these nuggets into iron, don't forget there's automatic packaging by way of the mechanical press. Pretty cool, right? So you can use your mechanical press to then turn those nuggets into iron ingots. Ooh. Ooh. So, you can see, Create gives you the pieces. You need to put them together. So it's not just place down machine and ore double, it's build a system that will ore double for you. Now, some players out there may say, this is a lot of work just for ore doubling or tripling. Other players will be like, wow, this is a lot of fun. I get to build a cool, complex system. I'm in that second camp. I like the idea of putting all these pieces together and building a system with which to ore double. Sounds like a lot of fun to me. Definitely more fun than just placing a single block down that does it for me. So, that is episode 2 of the Create Spotlight. For now, Devil20 signing off. Hope you guys enjoyed it. There's a lot more to see in Create. When we come back in part 3 of the Create Mod Spotlight, we'll be taking a look at some of these blocks here that can be used to build large automations to manipulate the world around you. And there's still a lot more to take a look at. We haven't seen fluid handling, we haven't seen redstone stuff, we haven't seen some of the other types of engines that are available. So there's a lot more to take a look at in Create. And we will check it out in the coming episodes. For now, like I said, Devil20 signing off. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and take it easy.